Hello. Happy Easter to all of you who celebrate Easter. Happy Trans Visibility Day to you, to those of you who celebrate that. Oh, brother. Uh, we're not going to go into that though. Just gonna acknowledge it and let it linger in the air for a little bit. All right. So, Freaknik, the documentary was released on Hulu. I don't have Hulu, so I had to bootleg it. Um, I talked about this documentary with Society Movies on Saturday afternoon. He's going to be uploading a video of our conversation on it. I decided to make, I was going to talk about it myself when I watched it, but because he had, pretty much provided me a link and had already planned on, the recording, I went ahead and did that one first. But I spent some time after talking to him to do some research because I wanted to discuss what I felt was being left out of the documentary. I wanted to discuss that, but I hadn't looked into it yet because I had just watched it. So you're going to see me talk about this thing twice. Usually, I'm going to when he uploads the our conversation, we're going to get both sides of us talking about this documentary. But I'm going to dig into it a little bit as I tend to do. I turned it into a little bit of a research project, just to fill out the documentary, similar to how I do Dark Side of the Ring or biographies or any other documentary that I watch. I see things, I hear things, then I also see and hear things that are not heard, that are not said. So there was a lot of stuff about Freaknik that I thought the documentary that I thought, okay, there's got to be more to it than that. And so I looked it up, and I found a treasure trove of stuff. It doesn't really change a lot, but it changes enough for me to believe that the documentary was mostly not really playing the game fair in terms of providing information. But first, let's get into it. WG Phil, everybody else who is participating in tonight's live stream, hello. How are you guys doing? Again, happy Easter. Happy Trans Day of Visibility or whatever to those of you who celebrate that. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to keep saying it until. But all right. So Freaknik, let's get into this thing. I think this is a wonderful companion piece to my defensive hip hop conversation that I had on Thursday. And in the defensive hip hop, I discussed how a lot of the things that people blame for hip hop existed prior to, well, I should say gangster rap existed prior to the founding of what we refer to as gangster rap. Now, Freaknik is not necessarily something that spins out of gangster rap, but it spins out of extremely vulgar hip hop music that is mostly for the clubs. Is mostly for the strip clubs. Is mostly for the hood. It's not exactly, and it shows. I believe that Freaknik had two sides to it. It was the middle class black people, and then there's the hood. You know, and there's Freaknik when it was for middle class college students, and then there's Freaknik that's for the hood. And what ends up happening is you end up having in this documentary middle class black people running interference for the misbehaviors of people who are from the hood. And that seems to be the issue. And look, I'm from the hood. That's without a doubt. So I'm not just saying things to attack people, but I believe in telling the truth. And I don't think you can actually fix any of the problems that you have in your society without coming face to face with some very fundamental truths. And fundamentally, Freaknik was a open air orgy. It was an open air hedonistic party that grew out of control and had to be reined in and shut down. But their excuse for why the party was shut down was just that, it's just an excuse. When you actually look into it, you could tell that the fall of Freaknik was actually inevitable, and it was probably long overdue, if we're being honest. So the documentary is split into three parts. Uh, the early part, which is the origins of Freaknik. Where did it come from? Why did it exist? The growth of Freaknik, which is when Hollywood got involved, when a bunch of the entertainment industry started getting involved, and the third part is the death. Why? Why did Freaknik fall apart? What did they do to shut it down? Why was it shut down? And what was the legacy? That would be part of the third part. All right. So we're going to go through this a little bit. The origins are 100% believable. They 100% make sense. And even though I did speak kind of I was kind of rough with the founders of the event when I talked to Society Movies, mainly because I believe that as a college, well, let's talk about the origins first before I get into my criticism. So, Freaknik was founded in 1983 by what they call the state clubs at the HBCUs in Atlanta. So there were a lot of HBCUs in the same general area in Atlanta, and they decided to have a spring break picnic where all of the students who couldn't afford to go home could just stick around, have fun, have a picnic for them, the students that were stuck on campus. It is 100% believable. I do not criticize that too much, except for everybody started saying, "Oh, it was just fun. It was fine. There was no issues," and I can believe that for maybe the first couple of years. The the HBCUs in and of themselves, and the first part of the documentary was really focused on. Um, Before I really got through with the documentary, part of my notes was that this thing was an infomercial for historically black colleges and universities, as well as the city of Atlanta, because it really put over Atlanta as the black mecca, where the government is black, the police are black, etc. So it was the perfect place to host an event like a Freaknik. And at these HBCUs, they were talking about black people. They didn't say that black people were not allowed to go on spring break or to go to quote unquote historically white areas for spring break, which always considered weird to me because there's very few places that you will not see black people show up if it's a party or something like that. So the name Freaknik did not come from uh, the 90s understanding of the word freak, but for the 70s understanding of the word freak, because there was a Chic song called "La Freak" and there was a dance called "The Freak," and it was basically freak picnic put it together, and that was the idea. It was named after a dance in a 1970s sort of disco song, um, and it makes sense because those students in 1983 would have been old enough to live through the days of Chic and Freak Out and listen to that music. And similar to what I said before when I talked about Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, they mirror the music that they listen to. These college students were no different. They liked the dance crazes and stuff like that back from when they were kids. And in 1978, a lot of these college students would have been probably early teenagers, or some of them would have been late teenagers. And that's the kind of stuff they was listening to. That was the material that they was bringing in, and that's the vibe that they wanted to bring to the events. So in the early 80s, it was about spring break for students who couldn't go home, and it wasn't about sex. It was just one of the founders called it basically a Southern cookout, which is 100% believable, and I buy that, and I'll have no reason to doubt that was the origin of Freaknik because it's 100% believable. Having been a person who went to college and knew students who couldn't go home for spring break, They do need things to occupy their time. And if you have all these groups of fraternities and sororities and all these other various groups, they call it the state clubs on campus, where the state clubs were students that were grouped by where they were from. So there was like a California club or a Washington D.C. club or you know whatever, so that people could know when they were. You can have people who are familiar with your background, who know where you come from, and that was actually a great idea. I like that idea actually to have a state club. That was pretty cool. We had something similar in Job Corps where you had people who were from Detroit, some people who were from Chicago, and they would always link up. And if they were going to go to, let's say, Indianapolis, it would always be easier if you knew people, you know, who were from the city that you were from, so that you guys could stick together. And sometimes it made it easier to go home too, you know, because some people know the bus routes home, and the different things, different ins and outs of traveling from different areas and different and things like that. And you have relationships when you go back. You have friendships, people that people that you've met, and you can continue to build those friendships afterwards. So I fully support the idea. I like the idea. It was great. State clubs are really good. So it was so I can buy that the early days of Freaknik were really good. So now we go into the second part, which is the growth of Freaknik. And now they start discussing the entertainment industry's involvement in the event. And the entertainment industry's involvement in the event, they talked about School Days, a Spike Lee movie. Back when I used to lead a fraternity, I used to have students watch School Days just to mentally prepare them for what it's like to pledge. Um, and I think that that was pretty successful, because taking people into that thing without having any idea of what it's like to pledge, people get the wrong idea. It's not abusive or anything like that. It's a lot of it is mental games. A lot of it is testing your metal and stuff like that. So I would always have kids watch School Days. But Spike Lee apparently went to an HBCU. I don't remember which one he went to, and he popularized clearly fraternities and sororities and on-campus life of Black colleges through School Days. And what you saw from there is a different world, which was the Bill Cosby television show. They mentioned Freaknik on a different world. Now I mentioned this conversation. I mentioned had a conversation with Game of Society Movies where we talked about a different world, and I said if Freaknik was what it would become in the late '80s when a different world was discussing it, which would have been about '88 or '89, where they were talking about um, Freaknik in the episode. Basically, it was just like a party. If it was what it turned into later, Bill Cosby never would have had that event mentioned on television, because he would have wanted nothing to do with it. Now, this is the same Bill Cosby who, fired Lisa Bonet for doing like a topless scene in the movie. You know, I think the movie might have been slightly softcore pornographic, and he was just not having it. So he was an extremely conservative guy who often paid for his young actors to go to college. So he was very college oriented. In fact, that was a lot of the trouble that Bill Cosby was getting into, was that apparently he was sponsoring students to go to colleges, and some people claim that he was taking advantage of those students. But knowing what I know about Bill Cosby, what I can prove about Bill Cosby, likely would have been supportive of the idea of Freaknik if he didn't know what it was. But it was mentioned on A Different World, which was a television show that was about Black universities, a Black college students. And so the popularity of it starts to grow because now the entertainment industry is starting to pay attention to it. You see more growth of fraternities and sororities around this point in time. Southern culture is starting to get, a little bit picked up a little bit more. They don't have a thriving, rap industry yet, which will be coming in the early the mid 90s thereabouts. But they do have a Southern culture, and they start talking about what they call the Rim Shop, which was a great place for celebrities to meet. And there was rappers and there was ball players, and it became a hangout for celebrities. And once celebrities start hanging out at Freaknik, well, now there's people talking about it. And the word is spread that there is a huge party that takes place every year on college campuses in Atlanta. And yes, A Different World was a spinoff of the Cosby Show. Um, so as word spread and celebrities were talking about it, more and more people started to flock to Freaknik, and it becomes basically what we know Freaknik to be. Now, in the late '80s and the early '90s of Freaknik, um, there was not a lot of hip hop, because there was no hip hop played in Atlanta that often. They spent some time talking about the radio, not playing hip hop at all, almost at all, and there was also no Atlanta artists that was being played, so there was not a lot of rap music being played at Freaknik at all. Um, and then times started to change. You started seeing Jermaine Dupri. He gets a lot of credit in the documentary for breaking through um, with the Atlanta artists like Criss Cross and Escape and Debrat, and So Def Records start to really just kind of blow up. And so Jermaine Dupri, who at the time was a very young man, and they really do a good job of putting him over. Killer Mike says that he's super powerful, Jermaine Dupri, not powerful because he wields power over other, but powerful because he empowers. Then they showed a gigantic billboard of So Def Records that was on a billboard over Freaknik. Um, and so this was like the early days of Freaknik. So this had to be about maybe 90, 91, 92, because I think Criss Cross came out in 92. Um, so things start to pick up. The music industry is starting to notice. The other industries are starting to notice. They're all starting to flock to Atlanta to for Freaknik, and the event's starting to grow, and it's starting to grow very rapidly. In 1993, we started getting a little bit more of a hard turn. This is where we get Luke Campbell and Two Live Crew. Now, Luke Campbell and Two Live Crew, which was rap groups that C. Dolores Tucker and Calvin Butts tried to absolutely take apart in the early 90s because of the vulgarity of the music, because of the vulgarity of the visuals, the music videos. And in the documentary, Luke Campbell brags that he brought the freak to Freakniks, that he brought the sexually charged music to sexually charged students. Luke is bragging about how he's the king of freak shit, and how in Miami all the music is about strip clubs, and he brings that sort of vibe to Freaknik and to Atlanta. Um, and Two Live Crew starts shooting music videos at Freaknik. It becomes a big deal. So Freaknik '93 is when things starts to really shift. And Freaknik '93 is where they start discussing the sexuality element. So they start talking about it in the documentary, that about women expressing their own desires, that this was about women's liberation, the liberation of various college students who get to express themselves without backlash and having lower inhibitions. They're walking around in Daisy Dukes and coochie cutters, their asses are out. This is, of course, the influence of Two Live Crew um, on the music business, as they are rebelling against the more conservative individuals who are saying we don't want this stuff. But these are not the college students of 10 years prior. In 1983, it was different. This is 1993. This is a completely different generation of college students. And, for them, this is their music. This is what they wanted to listen to. This was, their thing. And so stuff starts to change a little bit. Clearly, we get uh, a lot of people showing up to this event. There's a news site called 19thnews.org. They wrote an article in April of 2023 about Freaknik, and they said this was the first time 100,000 people showed up to Freaknik. It was 1993. There was tons of traffic issues. Businesses struggled as they had to shut down. People were stuck at home because the streets were clogged. You couldn't travel. You couldn't really do much of anything. The city was shut down, and this made it very difficult for the city to operate and for people to move around. So Freaknik takes on another level in '93, and some of the middle class people who are probably already college graduates, um, when they start talking about 1993, they're talking about like TLC, and they're talking about there's condoms, of course, with Lisa Left Eye Lopez, and the sex thing and all this kind of stuff. But the reason why I mention that these are middle class people because there's a lot of people who party, but those people they don't party like other people party. There's a lot of middle class girls who probably went to Freaknik and were going to bed at 10 o'clock or 11 or whatever. They were not up until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. They were not up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They hung with their friends. They got a little bit drunk. Maybe they danced a lot and then they went home. There were other people who were involved in this thing who don't know when the party is over. And those people are the people who became the ones who defined what Freaknik is. GK Aaron says, it's always funny how when women feel liberation, it's always about sexuality. Well, yes, because for them, that's the one thing they feel like they can control is their own bodies. Um, it's an old enlightenment concept that if you're the only way for you to truly be free is for you to truly have full control over your body. This is why they focus so much on things like abortion and how women dress in public and things like this. So I understand it um, as a philosophy, but the downsides of it is what they're trying to avoid, and there's just no way to avoid the downside of it, as it seems really silly to me that you would expect things to always go your way, but here it is. They're inviting this kind of attention. You know, they're talking about the revealing clothes that these women are wearing, and things are getting out of control. But they feel okay, it's not too bad yet. The rappers in the documentary, their favorite Freaknik is Freaknik '94. This is Luke saying like, "Oh, this is the black people's Woodstock." At this point, we're not even talking about college anymore. This was a good thing that Society Movies noticed is that after a certain point, it stopped being about the college students and the universities, and it started being all about it just being an open air orgy that other people was involved in. And so Luke Campbell, who is not a college age student at this time, he couldn't have been, is talking about being this is like our Woodstock, you know, and things start getting really tense around this time because there's about 150,000 people coming to Freaknik in 1994. You know, oh no, in 1994, according to 19thnews.org, 200,000 people showed up at Freaknik 1994. They tried to rename the event the Atlanta Black College Spring Break, but that name did not stick. Freaknik actually continued going. The police chief told HBCU students to not show up to Freaknik. Of course, they did so anyway. One of my issues that I discussed in my conversation with Society Movies that I maintain is that the universities didn't do enough to look after the students. Well, I found an article in which the 19thnews.org says that, Morehouse and Spelman specifically were concerned about the university's reputations, that they didn't want to be known as party schools, and that, schools that, kids only went to because Freaknik was going to be once a year and everything was going to be wild and crazy and who knows what's going to happen. They were concerned about the reputation of their schools, but they still did not tell students not to participate in Freaknik. They still didn't tell students not to do it. So at this point in time, Freaknik '94 is tremendous. 200,000 people showed up. The city is completely locked down. They're in the documentary. They're talking about how people was just parking and getting out and walking, which is if you've ever been a part of a large party, much like a Freaknik, then you would know that that's real. You just want to get in the general area. If I'm pretty sure every city has like a big club or a big party or something like that that's outside, and you just want to be in generally in the area. You know, you don't care where the car is. You just want to be in the area. Um, at this point, also, Outcast becomes a big deal. The Outcast tapes starts to float around because again, the music industry is involved. The music industry is helping to push Freaknik. The music industry is helping to help it grow. They're calling in for artists and um, to come in and participate. And so they started spreading around the tape for Outkast, the Southern Playalistic Cadillac music for Outkast. The tapes started being sold at Freaknik because the demographics are now in their favor. You know, these young black people, college age. A lot of them are from Atlanta. They're from the same general area. So local artists are going down there to sell tapes, and move their tapes into strip clubs, etc. Things start to really build. And one of the women in the documentary mentioned how it became a marketer's dream. You know, it became a big deal for the entertainment industry to be involved in Freaknik. They started selling T-shirts about Freaknik. They started selling Freaknik merchandise, hats and shades and posters and all this kind of stuff. So people started to make money off of this thing. Now the flip side is they actually started to lose money too. People who had businesses that were already in operation, they were forced to shut their businesses down um, at this point in time. So when you look at Freaknik '94, which is the rapper's favorite Freaknik, things is getting out of control. All right, is really starting to grow beyond the limits that the college students are looking for. So 1995 comes in, and the Atlanta raps have grown. The talent explodes onto the scene. Everything is tremendous. According to 19thnews.org, 100,000 people showed up to Freaknik 1995. And this was not mentioned in the documentary that needs to be mentioned. I'm going to mention it here, and this becomes an issue. There were 10 reported rapes at Freaknik '95. 10 rapes. At this point in time, 19th News starts to notice that the college scene is mostly gone. There's a lot of older people coming in. The city is trying to control Freaknik by having an official website. They want to have party zones. They want to have like Coca-Cola sponsorships, all this stuff. And it's not exactly well accepted by the party goers or the people who are putting on these events. And this is a very loose event, by the way, the Freaknik. It's not like there's an organizer. You know, a lot of times people are just finding out that, oh, this is spring break. We're just going to go down there for Freaknik. So people resisted the city's attempts to get involved and to slow down what's going on. There's even talk, it would come later on, about wanting to ID check people to make sure that they were college students or to make sure that, there were not any people who were too young to be at these events. And all of that kind of stuff was sort of thrown out of the window and people were not interested. But the one thing that they did not mention in this documentary, they didn't mention it until they started talking about '98. There were 10 rapes reported in Freaknik '95. 10 rapes. 10. Just at this event. Now, I couldn't find any information because I would have to really turn this thing into a really deep dive in order for me. I would have to pull like national crime victimization surveys and all this kind of stuff in order to see what real crime effects took place during Freaknik weekends in Atlanta. But you can pretty much guess, if you know anything about crime and criminal behavior, if people are leaving their cars on the street, you pretty much know people are breaking into cars. There's large numbers of people, especially males, who are drinking, doing drugs, behaving inappropriately. So you know that there's some sexual assaults. These things are not really mentioned until later in the documentary, but they were actually happening earlier than the people in the documentary are willing to talk about. Now, here's the thing, and I mention this now, because in the documentary, they start talking about 1996. Now, they mentioned that Atlanta wins the lottery to get the Olympics in 1996, and now the city is trying to clean up Freaknik. One of the quotes in the documentary is that Freaknik is now more about the freak than the Nick, which I think is interesting. They start talking about people driving around in vans, having paid peep shows. The fun starts to diminish a lot as the disrespect of the men start to come in. There's a lot of attacks by the more middle class older people that Freaknik is vulgar. It's not a good representation of black people. Of course, they did the whataboutisms when it comes to white kids going to Daytona Beach or whatever. Who cares about that? I mean, I'm not going to entertain any whataboutisms. We're talking about whether this was good or not. White people were not happy, not thrilled at all, and neither was the middle class blacks. And they blamed a lot of this on the Olympics, saying that basically the Olympics was an attempt for Atlanta to go international. And that even though Freaknik had been noted to bring in about $20 million to the city, the Olympics could bring in lots more, much, much more. And so they began to try to tamp down on Freaknik as a way to make the city more palatable for the Olympics. This is what they said in the documentary. There's a young, I'm pretty sure it's a young lady. Her name is Marion Myers. She wrote an article. Now, this paper is a feminist paper, but it's the only thing I could find that was sensible about what was going on at Freaknik. And she discusses sexual assaults and rapes in Atlanta at Freaknik. And she found that Grady Memorial Hospital had, the Monday through Friday before the Freaknik, there were 4 rape victims found in Grady Memorial Hospital. On the Monday through Friday after Freaknik, there were 8 rape victims in the hospital. On the 4 days during Freaknik, which would be April 19th to April 22, 1996, there were 20 rape victims in the hospital. This was something that was, again, not mentioned in the documentary. Freaknik 96, there was a 400% increase in rapes over that weekend. 400% increase from 4 to 20. That's untenable. Assuming that's true, it's absolutely untenable. Now, because Marion Myers is an academic, and I'm not sure where her background is in, but her paper was looking at the media response to Freaknik, because she was really offended that the sexual assaults and different things like that about Freaknik were not discussed more. But she mentioned that there was mass looting in Freaknik 95 and Freaknik 96, and this is proven by there being news footage of mass looting at both Freaknik 95 and 96. She was upset that women were not warned about the violence going into Freaknik 96. Now, again, Freaknik 95, there was an article, there was reportedly 10 rapes. Okay. Now, the documentary is pro Freaknik. It's supposed to be. All right. This is why a lot of the sexual assaults and things like that that I'm reading from articles now were not reported in the documentary. Ultimately, the documentary was supposed to be pro Freaknik. All right. It was supposed to tell you that, black people, we had something for ourselves, and then, they wanted the white money from the Olympics, and that broke everything down. But they're not telling the entire truth. The entire truth is there was a lot of crime during Freaknik, which anybody with common sense would have known. I figured that part out before the goddamn 40-minute mark. Once you tell me there's 100,000 people and they shut down downtown Atlanta, I'll say, okay, how many people had their houses broken into, or had their cars broken into, rather? How many people got punched? How many people probably got shot or beat up? When you're talking about drinks, alcohol, stuff like that, you're talking about women and men commingling. You're talking about college students. You're talking about people driving from from places like New York or Baltimore or Chicago or Detroit or whatever, and then coming down to Atlanta. You don't know who they are. You can't vet them. There's got to be tons of crime. But they didn't mention any of that crime in the documentary. None of that stuff was mentioned. They blaming this thing on the Olympics. Oh, the Olympics are coming to town, so they're going to try to shut down Freaknik because of the Olympics. So they started discussing Freaknik 96, saying that, okay, Atlanta's trying to clean itself up because of the Olympics. Killer Mike is in the documentary talking about, oh, this is about putting the poor, disenfranchised people out. Brother, what are you talking about? These are middle-class black students. Okay, anybody who can afford to drive to Atlanta for Freaknik is probably not poor and disenfranchised. I hate to break it to you. If you can drive from Baltimore to Atlanta for Freaknik, you're probably not disenfranchised, because that's a lot of gas. CeeLo Green said that it was big bank take little bank, which I think makes more sense. But it was becoming, at this point, Freaknik has been going on for 13 years. And Freaknik 96. It's been going on for 13 years. Every year the city is stopped up. The exits are blocked. The police are trying to contain the event. They're trying to control it. People are everywhere. But they didn't mention why they were trying to contain it or trying to control it. It's because of the mass sexual assault and the mass looting. For the record, they didn't want to say that, but that's what it was. But here's the thing: there was a Washington Post article in April 18th of 1996 that told the story that 100,000 people was at Freaknik 96. That there were shops that were closing early because they didn't want, their employees couldn't get to work. The owner, also customers couldn't get to the stores. There was a lot of complaints of looting. The city leaders refused to help them. And they felt like the looting in 95 and 96 at Freaknik was painting a bad light on college students, even though a lot of these college students were not involved with that stuff. There's a lot of people who are from the outside and people who are quote unquote locals. So as Marion Myers discusses this thing, local is probably meant to mean inner city black people who, have no business being on a college campus or anywhere near this thing. But it was an interesting bit that Louis Farrakhan actually spoke at in Atlanta shortly before Freaknik as a way of trying to get people to control themselves and have fun that weekend. Apparently it didn't go very well. It didn't go very well at all. So Freaknik 96 is sort of where things start to jump the shark. Um, this documentary really starts to turn off. It has a hard turn at 1998. Now, 1998, Freaknik, is where you get the young lady named Stacy Brown who got attacked at Freaknik, and she got her clothes ripped off of her, and they tell her story in the documentary. This is the first time they start talking about sexual assault in the Freaknik documentary. Now, again, this is why I mentioned reading other materials. There's talks of 10 rapes 3 years prior to this. Okay? But they're talking about there being 2 rapes at Freaknik 1998. The Minnesota Daily article from 1998. This is not in the documentary. It shows roving camera footages of males groping women and looting. But you still had a lot of black college students claiming that it was not worse than white spring break, and that the majority was no longer college students. At this point in 98, it's 20 to 30-year-olds, and they're coming to Atlanta to party. Mark Lamont Hill is that clown. He's in this thing, and he wants to give this thing about it's not about, we don't want to believe everybody to believe that it was black males that are sex predators and all this kind of stuff. That's a stereotype. And I was thinking to myself, like, bro, we were talking about this thing. 100,000 people show up to this event. All right, 100,000 people. Less than 1% of that can cause a lot of problems. Now, here's an interesting bit. 19th News, they said that Freaknik 98, things fell off a cliff. It was only 50,000 people that showed up. So that goes to show how bad things were at 95, 96, 97. 50,000 people showed up. That was it. And in 1998, there were still 4 rapes, 6 sexual assaults, 481 arrests. And MTV ended up doing a true life episode on Freaknik that showed tons of crime in Atlanta during Freaknik. This had been going on for a while. See, this is what I mean by when you watch a documentary or something like that, the documentary is mostly pro Freaknik. And it's mostly about how great a cultural event it was, how it was, for us, by us. It was created by black college students who just wanted to have some fun and blow off some steam, and they just wanted to do all these things. And then it turned into something different once Hollywood and the entertainment industry and the rappers and all these people started getting involved. The game changed at some point, and at some point probably was 94 when things started to change. All right, 93, 94, Freaknik is getting crazy. 100,000, 200,000 people showing up over the course of the next couple of days. They're looting, they're raping, they're sexually assaulting women. But the documentary doesn't go into any of that because they want to talk about it as if it was great for the city of Atlanta. It was something great created by the HBCUs. And Mark Lamont Hill later on was like, we need Freaknik. We need a Freaknik. Shut your ass. So Freaknik 98, things are really bad. And MTV starts talking about it, and things are not looking good. They ain't looking good at all. So Freaknik 99 is the last one, I believe, or maybe it was a Freaknik 2000. I'm not really sure, but Freaknik 99. Things have a turn for the worse. There now at Freaknik there are more men than women. Due to all the sexual assaults, due to all of the crime, very few women showed up to Freaknik 99, which led to Freaknik 2000. And 50,000 people showed up to Freaknik 2000. So from 98 to 2000, the number of people who attended Freaknik fell off a cliff. It was no longer at the 93, 94 levels. At this point, people started calling Freaknik dead. It was over. There was 10 to 12 guys for every girl. The guys were extremely rowdy, rude, and disrespectful. And without women, especially college-age women, this event cannot continue. This is what they said in the Orlando Sentinel article from April 2000. That attendance fell off a cliff. The city leaders had failed for years to control this event. And so while they're blaming the Olympics for why Freaknik had to change, what really killed Freaknik wasn't the Olympics. It was that women stopped coming to these events because the men were out of control. Yeah, it became a sausage party. This is why clubs charge men to get in while women can get in for free. This is why. There's no barrier to entry. So a lot of men show up and they run all the women off. They're host scaring, as you know they call it now. So in the documentary, they blamed the Olympics. They blamed the white people complaining. They talked a little bit about the sexual assault, but they didn't really go into it. If you watched the documentary only, you'd think that, oh, Atlanta just changed their mind once they got the Olympics. All of a sudden, no, they didn't need Freaknik anymore. In reality, what happened is it became a sausage party. There was too many men, not nearly enough women. The women had got run off. And so the women stopped participating, so it stopped being a thing. And in 2000, it was over. Yep, on pretty much every club will let women in for free. Most clubs that are successful will let women in for free, and they'll charge the men. So, because you want to have more women than men for your party. So, generally, that's what happened. Now, the documentary goes into a guy named Carlos Neal who bought the name Freaknik and tried to turn it into a festival. He bought it in 2018. And he's trying to have like programs and different things like this. And he just gets destroyed by the rappers, you know, Luke Campbell and Jermaine Dupri and Lil Jon and all these folks who are like, oh, well, we remember Freaknik. It was Freaknik 93, Freaknik 94. You can't just redo Freaknik, which is true. You know, he talking about how Freaknik is a lifestyle and all. Yeah, all that's true. Which is why, you know, people trying to keep the name alive is kind of weird and quite stupid, actually. But they're attacking this kid who is trying to keep this thing. Well, I don't know how old he is, so I call him a kid anyway. He's trying to hold it together as a cultural event. He's being attacked by all of these people who just used it as a freak show, who showed up for the Daisy Dukes and the crop tops. You know, they're the ones who, in reality, fucked the whole thing up. Luke Campbell specifically screwed it up. Now, I don't want to blame him 100%, but he was the one who basically took credit for it. I brought the freak to Freaknik. Somebody had to. Oh, okay. So I guess you get to eat this credit then for how rowdy it got. You know? So yeah, 21 Savage, I mean, he's a kid. Like he wasn't even I'm pretty sure he was born like in 2000 or something like that, maybe 99. He looked like a really young guy, but I don't know anything about him. But it wasn't just him. It was pretty much all the rappers that were there. Luke Campbell, Jermaine Dupri, Lil Jon, pretty much all of them said like you just can't revive this thing. You can't just call your little event Freaknik and then it's the same thing. Like, nah, you can't do that. And that's technically true. what it is you can't resurrect that level of freedom and freedom of expression, but you also, they don't want to bring that back. And you see a lot of the folks in the later part of the documentary um, talk about how everybody's too uptight right now to have a Freaknik party. And I'm thinking, like, what do you think it was in 1992 when they were trying to shut everything that you were listening to down? Talk about everybody's too uptight today to have a Freaknik. Are you serious? In 1992, there was a guy with a steamroller trying to run over rap albums. They were far more uptight in the early 90s. And then you won that war to have your crazy rape parties. So that was a documentary, you know. It was clear that the documentary was decidedly pro Freaknik. And they were trying to really paint it as a cultural event, and black men aren't prone to, wild sexual behaviors and all this kind of stuff. But what the real problem was, and something they didn't want to discuss, and there's things that they don't want to discuss, is that you mixed the two classes of people, and you mixed, the hood and the middle class mixed together, and it caused a problem. All right. You had, the hoochies showed up to the college campuses. And once guys start seeing hoes, they can't tell the difference. So if you start bringing strippers to Freaknik, which you no doubt they did, because why wouldn't they? Once the strippers and the hoes show up, the men can't tell the difference between, the good girls who are just out there to party, have a couple of sips and dance, between the chicks that are trying to take their tops off and shaking that ass and doing all this. They can't tell the difference. They can't. And then when they get drunk, there really is no difference. So without no kind of barriers, without no control, it's essentially an open air orgy. And when you look at the footage, they curated the footage quite a bit, where there's, a lot of sexual suggestive stuff where, men are asking girls to take their tops off, or, different things like that. And that's about it. But it got worse than that. There was a reason they were bringing camcorders to Freaknik. All right. Like, see, that's the thing I want to discuss here at the very end is a lot of women, and this was what was that young lady's name? Marion Myers, who wrote this article in 2004 about Freaknik. She says, quote, stereotypic Jezebels who provoke male violence through their own behavior. And basically she's saying, like, through this part of her paper, is that women are often blamed for their own behaviors due to how they dressed and how they approach different subjects and stuff like this. It's typical feminist garbage where you want to have a liberated female, but she's not actually held accountable for her own behavior. So when you look at that, you have to say you'll never get it right if you keep coming up with excuses. I don't excuse the males who did terrible shit at Freaknik. I don't look at the worst male behaviors and say that's indicative of black males in general. It's indicative of those individual males. They just happen to be black and male. Just like they might happen to be 25 or 26 or 19 or whatever. While women are trying to cocoon other women from blame, it's like, not only, for starters, you showed up to this event knowing what it was. You dressed for the occasion. You started drinking, partying, lowering your inhibitions. on purpose. You wanted to participate and did not think that this could happen. There's an old proverb, I think it is, about the wolf licking the knife. If you stick a knife in the ground and a wolf, maybe you put a little bit of blood on it and the wolf will come and start licking it. And then the wolf loves to taste the blood. He keeps licking it until eventually he dies of his own blood loss because he can't tell the difference between your blood and his own. This was Freaknik, 100%. Somebody came in, 92, 93. They put a little bit of blood on the knife, and all the wolves showed up and started licking the knife. And you could see every year fewer and fewer people were coming in. There was more and more complaints about crime, more and more complaints about economic damage to the city. People were concerned about the reputation of the university system. Of all the articles I read on this subject, and I admittedly didn't read that many. I read like 8. There's not a lot of talk about how the women brought this on themselves, and they did. In fact, early in the documentary, they're talking about how great it was that young women were walking around in booty shorts, how great it was that women would walk around in coochie cutters, that they could do this stuff at Freaknik and not be judged. You're wrong. You were being judged. You were being judged by the guys who were stripping women naked in the street. You were being judged by the guys who were raping women. Those are the guys who were judging you. It's sick. You can't argue with people who don't accept accountability for their own actions and their behaviors. You know, you can still hold the man accountable for what he did, but you have to understand when you put the wolves in the hen house, the wolf is going to do what he do. You know, every creature has a nature. Every creature has a nature. And if you continuously put people, especially a lot of people, in a situation where they can unleash the darkest elements of their own behavior, some people are not going to go in there and rape folks. A large number of people are not going to go to Freaknik and rape anybody. They might steal from a car. But then there's a bunch of other things that, people didn't talk about. I read an article, I didn't mention it in this review or in my discussion. A 25-year-old woman went to Freaknik. She's 25. She went from, I think, New York to Freaknik. She was on a quote unquote a break with her boyfriend. And she went to Freaknik. And she came back from Freaknik pregnant. Of course, the boyfriend thought the baby was his. I I would suggest she believes that she was pregnant when she went to Freaknik. And apparently the guy believes that she was pregnant when she went to Freaknik too. But and I think she went to Freaknik 96 or 97 or something like that, because her daughter's like 23, 24 years old now. So but just think about that. Because we didn't get into that. We didn't get into, how many people probably got their ass whooped because they pushed up on somebody's girlfriend at Freaknik. Or some guy went down to Freaknik looking for his girl because he couldn't find her. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into this thing that people aren't touching. Nobody wants to touch those subjects. And look, I don't understand that. That's maybe a little too deep into it. But it had a reputation. That's why you see all of these people trying to protect the reputation of the event. Part of the discussion about Freaknik is all of these individuals who are on TikTok talking about how their moms and their aunts, how can you look at us and judge us when you guys had Freaknik and you were going to Freaknik doing whatever. They didn't even have to need to go to Freaknik. There's always been clubs. You know, your mama partied. But that's also why you should be listening to her when she tells you to not dress like that. Maybe you should listen to her when she talks about the music being too vulgar, because she's already lived through what happens. And she's no doubt. Now, most people are not going to do research on Freaknik, but it doesn't take much looking to figure it out. If these people are involved with these events, there will be sexual assaults, there will be rapes, there will be violence, there will be looting, there will be robberies, because there are predators in our society who are just looking for a way to cover it up. And you absolutely do need to learn from your elders' mistakes. So I'm thinking that a lot of this is a way to shame the adults and to empower the kids to keep going in their hedonistic, sex, lust-filled rampages and listening to stuff like Sexy Red, or listening to things like Cardi B and all this kind of stuff, because you had Little Kim, mama. You was listening to Trina, so you can't talk about me. And instead of discussing what that may have done to your mama's psyche, what that may have done to your mama's reputation, what it may have done to your family, because there's definitely some people who are feeling the ill effects of these kinds of quote unquote cultural events. But once I heard about it, that was what a lot of people was like, oh, there's going to be some aunties and grandmas and, some mamas who are going to be shamed in Freaknik. And then, of course, all the feminists were like, oh, there's going to be women who are going to be sexually assaulted. We should blur their faces, and we should pray for those victims, and we should ask their permission before we use their images and all this kind of stuff. It's like everybody's trying to concern troll about what this means. Just tell the story, right? And just tell the story honestly. That was always my issue, with that I was upset that there was not a lot of honesty being told in this thing. You can't tell me that over the course of Freaknik weekend, in 1995 there was 10 rapes reported, that there was a 400% increase in rapes over the weekend of Freaknik 90. What was this? Was 96? And these things were not just. And this article was written in 2004, so you know that the people who looked at the documentary and who made it could have looked that up. The woman who is quoting that stuff is a feminist. So it's not like, somebody like me who is decidedly not feminist is talking about this thing. This is somebody who already agrees with them and probably supports the idea of women's liberation, women's sexual liberation, and all this garbage. And she's talking about how many rapes were at Freaknik. So the legacy of it is, mom, dad, you can't judge me. Look at what you guys were doing. Look at what you and all your brothers and sisters were doing. Y'all were going to Freaknik, getting toe up. He said the Adult Swim adaptation of Freaknik. I don't know. I didn't see it. But it was clear that the documentary wanted to put over Atlanta, put over the HBCUs, tell everybody that Freaknik it started out very innocent. It was a fun time for those who went and had fun. They did not go out and search for people who had a difficult time at Freaknik. They found one person, Stacy Brown, because she was on the news when she got attacked during Freaknik '98, and she discussed it, and she discussed what she experienced in this documentary. But other than that, they didn't go looking for other people. You know, again, if there was 10 rapes in 1995 and 20 rapes over that weekend in '96, that's insane. That's insane. But it doesn't take a lot of people. Again, when you take into account that there's 100,000, 200,000 people there, that's not a lot, but it's more than enough. And for the documentary to not mention that is pretty sick as far as I'm concerned. But then again, I knew they were gonna lie. Um, there was a statement here I wanted that. Chuck Lees says, "What's the rape crime per capita, not just the total? More people came into the area. Yes, more people equals more rape crimes. Yes, that is absolutely. That's why I feel like it was safe to discuss these subjects, because unless I have actually sit down and go through the crime reports in Atlanta, which would take, I have to write a book if I was going to do that. All right. Because Freaknik lasted for 15 years, over 15 years, 16, 17 years, almost 20. All right. I would have to go through 1983 to 2000, look at the crime reports, specifically in, I believe it was April of each year. How many sexual assaults that took place at this particular time, and compare it to see whether Freaknik is a net positive or a net negative. And that's the reason why it becomes easy to sort of cover this stuff up, is because a lot of, and it's a crazy feminist talking point, we know that, but a lot of rapes and sexual assaults go unreported. And the news was looking at mostly the looting and the traffic. They weren't really paying too much attention to the rapes and the sexual assaults and different things like that. That will become a story later in the late '90s. But if you was to sit down and write an entire book on it, then yeah, I would expect people to go into the per capita and stuff like this. But to me, it was obvious. You have a gigantic event. People from all over the country are coming. You can't vet any of these people. You don't know how old these people are. You don't know whether they go to the school or not, why they are tangentially related to the school in any way. You don't know who is in the car with them. You don't know what they're bringing. Are they bringing illegal alcohol? Are they bringing drugs? Are they bringing weapons? Cars are being broken into. Stores are being broken into. Fights are happening. It's too much to keep track of. But you're led to believe that everything was just great until 1996. Then the Olympics happened. Oh, we were all having so much fun having Freaknik. We were making money hand over fist. The music business was booming. Outkast was there. So Def was there. And the Notorious B.I.G. performed at Freaknik. Like, yeah, that's great and all. But I don't believe that all of a sudden you guys had the Olympics and now they're going to get rid of Freaknik. I don't believe that. And I didn't believe it. And that stuck with my craw for so much that I did go and look it up. Because I was like, that just seemed such a convenient excuse. Oh, the white people liked the Olympics more. And, the white people, of course, the white people are almost always blamed for being the people who shut down Black fun. And that was, again, the case here. The white residents didn't like Freaknik, but the Black residents did. And that remains one of the angles that people discuss today. AJ3 says Freaknik or Woodstock 99, which one is worse? I've seen both documentaries and they all said the same thing about rape. That's the thing. I don't remember Woodstock 99, if we're being honest. But when you have mass gatherings, The rape and the sexual assault and the looting and the crime is inevitable. When you had oh my god, it was a political thing, and they were sleeping in the streets. Which was it? Good God, I had it right on the tip of my tongue, and then I lost it. Um, but they found out maybe a year or two later after this. We are the 99%. What the hell was that called? But they found out later that there was a bunch of rapes in these tents. That these people were sleeping on the streets and sleeping outside in protest of Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street. There we go. That Occupy Wall Street, there was a tons of rapes at Occupy Wall Street. So it's not just like a black thing. People who are predators they'll find a way to do it. All right. The thing is, you give them the opportunity when you invite their targets into a large enclosed place with no oversight, and then say, go as you are, dress as you may. We're going to bring in other women who might be DTF, and we're going to mix them in with the women who are not DTF, and then the drunk idiots are not going to be able to tell the difference, or they're going to think they can convert them. Oh, you're just a sweet little college student. You're 20 years old. Well, come here. Let me grab your booty. Oh, no, 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 no. I got a man. What you doing down here then? I'm going to try to convert you into hold'em. Either you're not down for it, or I'm going to try to convert you. I'm going to talk you into it. Then if you get frustrated because you're drunk, who knows what might happen. But pretty much every event like this, there's mass crime. Which is why and it doesn't take that many people. Special J says, I like how they pointed out that the white spring breaks were kind of worse, but Freaknik was magnified because they were black. I don't understand why you would like that, because I don't know whether that's true or not. And plus, Freaknik went on for 15 years or whatever, and this documentary didn't really mention it at all. Again, whenever there's going to be spring break events and kids drinking, and I think I mentioned this when I was talking about the society movies, is just have a regular frat party. There's going to be, drunken touching and groping, and that's 200 people in a bar, or whatever. There's going to be that kind of stuff, so clearly it was going to be an issue at an event of this size, and especially an unstructured event at this size, of that size. So, but I don't think the whataboutisms about white spring break is really relevant. That would just mean that we need to stop having spring breaks in general. I'm not even against Freaknik. I'm against people lying about Freaknik. I'm against the lies. I'm against them trying to co-opt it as a hugely important black thing. Because then you're forced to internalize it. You're forced to defend the kind of debauchery that took place at this thing. We all know that spring break is crazy. Anybody who's ever gone to spring break is crazy. Anybody who's ever seen a TV show or a movie about it knows that spring break is nuts. But we also know that schools typically try to stop that because they don't want to be known as party schools. It devalues the degrees of the students. It also puts other students in danger. We also know, and I've been to plenty open air parties, huge open air parties. There's usually still police there. There's barricades. There is an opportunity to contain this thing. You can't have 100 to 200,000 people swarm an area, and it just go on and with no unabated. You just can't do that. It's not going to work. So I don't really see it as being a black or white thing. It's more of a let's tell the truth about it kind of thing, which is we get it that people like Mark Lamont Hill thinks Freaknik is great because it was all about the liberation of women and all this bullshit. But what did that mean? What it meant is you put a target on a lot of these women's backs, mixing the hoes with the middle class girls who just wanted to go down there and have a drink. You just wanted to party a little bit, listen to some music, sit and watch the festivities or whatever. And then the hoes come in and they're taking their tops off and they're getting a lot of attention. And yeah, there's going to be some chicks who are going to fall into that, but there's going to be a lot of chicks who weren't. Just like there's going to be a lot of guys who went down there and got caught up in some nonsense that they wouldn't normally do on their own. To me, it feels like there's a lot of leftists supporting hedonism as usual, and it doesn't really work out as well as they wanted it to, like, as usual, because they are defending something that is indefensible. You know, you can't dangle meat in front of these guys like this. I think this is the best way to put it. You don't advertise what you're not selling. You know, don't advertise what you're not selling. Special J says Miami had a commercial telling people stop coming down here, but that's what I like was it didn't just make black men look like predators; it was equal feminism. Okay, all right, that's fair. But I definitely think that I put a lot of blame on the universities because they should have controlled the students and told the students to stop it. You know, maybe threatened to pull some scholarships if students got caught doing this kind of stuff. And look, I get it. I know HBCUs are supposed to be down for the people and all this kind of shit, but you have to take into account they were in the city, they were in the area. These people are community leaders. You know, the leaders of the universities are community leaders. They know if there's mass crime that they don't want their students involved with that. They know, even if they don't know about the sexual assaults and the rapes, they still see videos of the looting. They can see that the city is shut down and basically pretty much guess that there's going to be a lot of crime. They got to know about the shootings and that there's strange people coming from who knows where in some corner of the world. They should have gotten a hold of their students and said, no. Not only will we not have this on our campus, which I don't believe they did. I think they was in these public parks where they mostly was doing most of this stuff. But we don't want you guys going down there. Don't go. You know, have a on-campus event at the same time that's fun, where you can control it, you know, especially for the girls. You know, this is where my patriarchy comes in, all right? My patriarchy only really comes in when it's time for you do need to protect women from guys, especially when these guys are drunk and horny and they have high expectations because they've been told for years and years and years Freaknik is crazy. You go down there, man, they're gonna have their tops off, they're gonna pull their pants down, there's gonna be girls having sex on the lawn, blah 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 blah. So their heads is filled up with all this shit. They want to go down there. That's the only time I really feel like the patriarchy is real. Is when I'm like, somebody's got to look after these girls. You know, a lot of them are naive. They don't really know the game. They don't really know what's going on. They think it's just a party. It's not. It's more than that. These dudes are trying to turn this thing into a porno. And I hate that they blamed a lot of the older guys. Like they kept talking about it being old men. Oh, it's 30 or 40-year-old men showed up. It's like, you don't think that there's 22-year-old perverts? Shit. You don't think that there's 20-year-old perverts down there, you know, grabbing asses? And if anything, the young boys should be pissed because now the older guys are coming in and taking all the girls. They're the ones with the nice cars. And they talked about that too. The guys would come down there and turn the rim shop into a car show. They would show off their cars and their jewelry and the fashion and everything. That just means that the guys who are more established, the guys who have more money, are going to be attracting more girls. So if you're like a broke college student, your girlfriend goes down to Freaknik, it's over. she she gonna hook up with some dope boy or some rapper or some ball player or something like that, and you're gonna be sitting there looking dumb. Like, and that could happen to you at any age. It don't even matter how old you are at that point. Low key, '07 says leftists support it because it promotes promiscuity. You can look for monogamy to really come under attack. Yeah, I mean that's really what it is they are promoting this hedonistic do as thou wilt lifestyle and thinking that there should be no consequences for this behavior. And it's like, look, is it fair that if somebody jump off a bridge that they have to hit the ground? No. But it's a fact that you jump off a bridge, you're going to hit the ground. So it should be noted, if you're a woman walking around half naked in front of these drunken men, you might not say, "Oh, well, that she doesn't deserve it." It doesn't matter whether she deserves it or not. Deserve is not even wrapped up in this thing. She's wearing a uniform that mixes her in with the hoes. If she's not a hoe, she don't even need to be down there. Or she need to do what all the middle class girls did. Take your ass home at 10 o'clock. I've seen plenty of women do that. I've seen it at frat parties. I've seen it in bar parties. You see a lot of the girls, they show their face, and then they're out of there before it gets really crazy. And then they talk about how, oh, it was so much fun. I had so much fun, blah, 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 blah. While the girl who stayed until 2 in the morning, she's pissed. She don't even know where she is because she was hanging out all night. Like some people just don't know when the party is over. And some people do. So everybody's going to have a different experience. GK Aaron says HBCUs don't care about their students. Down there at Southern and Baton Rouge, they're shooting in the dorms every weekend. Wow. That's truly sick. That's truly sick. But part of it is they feel like they have to protect the race and not their students. Right? They try to, we have to protect the race. We have to protect the gender, not our students. Like, no, your students are your responsibility, not the race, not the gender. Your students are your responsibility. When people sign to pay for their kid to go to college, they're hoping that there's adults down there who are going to put a stop to these insane things that are occurring. And this is why I think it was very important that people notice that the universities lost control of the party in like the early 90s. But they didn't lose control of the students, because the students eventually have to come back to campus, which is why they should have controlled the students. Because you can't stop, Too Short from coming from goddamn California to Atlanta. You can't do nothing about that. But you can deny him an audience. Once you kill the fun, like exactly what happened with Freaknik, they killed the fun. So guys stopped coming. So that was just one way of doing things. You could have run a competing party that was much safer on campus with security, and you carded everybody who came in, and you didn't let anybody in who wasn't, a member of an HBCU. You could have controlled the drinking. You could have controlled all of that stuff. And therefore, they could have had run the streets with people from Baltimore or Chicago or whatever. But on this campus or whatever, we're not doing that. Loki says also any ism that they talk about, they really mean capitalism. It leads to destroying capitalism. Yeah, to a degree. Which is why I don't like the idea that they diminished how businesses were affected in the Freaknik documentary. They basically was like, oh, there's people complaining about not being able to get to work and business owners having to close their businesses. It's like that's a lot of money being lost. You say, well, they bring $20 million into the city. Okay, but how much did they cost in looting and paying? They had the police officers working 12-hour shifts for Freaknik. How much were they paying for that? And you talk about, oh, they bring in X amount of dollars for the city. Okay, great, but what was it costing the city? You know, in terms of damage to property, looting, forced business closures. It's not tenable. You know, WG Field says women today, there's no difference between a girl who's there to hang out and a promiscuous woman. Yeah, and this is why you always try to tell girls not to hang out in places where there's going to be hoes. Like too many times if a guy is in a bar in a club, there's hoes and then there's chicks who are just there to hang out. Guys who do not know the difference. They don't know the difference. They don't know you. They don't know what you down for. Special J says, bro, I always tell my girl if a man is driving and needs gas, if he sees 7 dudes in front of the store, he would go to the next one. But a female will go to that store regardless. That's sad, isn't it? There's no situational awareness, you know? Um, there's just no situational awareness whatsoever. Gozu says that he thinks the city is still in the red. I think Atlanta is doing very well. Atlanta is a very middle class city. I know it still has some hood stuff, but the HBCUs and stuff are still there. It's still a very important cultural city for blacks in America. I wouldn't personally want to move to Atlanta. It's I'm just not a fan of the city. But um, I I understand why it took place to where it did, and I think it was a a perfect storm of all of these college campuses, of all these college students and young youth culture, and then the hood came in, you know, and the drugs and the alcohol and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah, the city had to be in the red during Freaknik for sure. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. Um, which should have told them to close it down a lot earlier than they really did, if we're being honest. All right, y'all. I gotta. I've been asleep all day, but gotta get back to sleep. I gotta go to work in the morning. Unfortunately, again, happy Easter to everybody. Thank you everybody for stopping in. When Society Movies uploads my conversation with him about Freaknik, I will be promoting it on the channel. But again, thanks to everybody for stopping by. I'll talk to you guys later. Uh, Peace out.